Is there any technology that you're aware of that is detracting from value that, if it exists out there, really needs to get overhauled, removed, replaced?
Absolutely. I'll jump this one off. So I actually have clients at a DFW that were looking to purchase roughly 400 units or so, and they had Bluetooth locks deployed. And so they were a shop that had actually deployed the Z-Wave technology. And so looking at the capital expenditures to change every single lock, that was not something.
So they were Bluetooth, or they were Z-Wave, or they were a combination of both?
So Bluetooth does, okay, sorry, I apologize. Shouldn't have got all nerdy there. So Bluetooth does not speak with Z-Wave.
Right.
So
I want to make sure if we're going to shame a technology, we're shaming the right technology here.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily that the lock itself is the problem. The problem was that it was a type of technology that didn't play well with all the other ones. So there are technologies that detract from value, but the bottom line is it's the technologies that don't play well with other technologies that are the ones that are detracting. So I was trying to give you an example with a Bluetooth lock and a client, but I think I may have complicated that a little bit. So I think foundationally, though, it's like owners have an expectation of what they expect a community to operate as. And so, when they're met with roadblocks when it comes to, say, if they're not using package lockers. There's a couple different ways to handle packages right now. There's package lockers, and there are solutions like Fetch that do package off-site delivery, right? Well, if it's a property and a property manager, I should say, that has already decided we're not going to do on-site packages, we're going to do a solution like Fetch, they're not necessarily going to want to spend the extra $120,000, $150,000 that's baked into the cost of an asset that's paid to deploy package lockers if that's not how they're operationally handling packages as a corporate company. So that's the only situation I've ever been really where I've heard that technologies have provided a negative side of things, but it's really from if the individuals that implemented that technology had pumped the brakes a little bit, done some research and understood that these things are future-proof capable, I think that likely they would have deployed the right technology. But I think there's so many different providers, there's so many different approaches, there is not a one-size-fits-all, and so everybody is really just trying to understand, like, do we deploy a Bluetooth lock or do we deploy a Z-Wave lock? And most companies don't have somebody who can tell you the difference between those two things. So I would encourage, if you guys have questions or if you don't know the difference between a Z-Wave system versus a Wi-Fi system versus these are things that we should discuss. These are things that you guys should be aware of, the differences between a Wi-Fi and a Z-Wave system. Crosstalk, huge issue.
And going back to that original example, is it fair to say that solutions that work in a single home residential can work very well, but if that type of solution is installed into a multifamily environment and treating these as just 100 separate residential units that are really close to each other, probably isn't going to be the right solution? That there are complexities like the crosstalk, there's making sure that you're providing an interface for the resident themselves, but also an enterprise-level dashboard to be able to coordinate that you might not find in a regular residential solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to cross any lines here with Joel because he mentioned possibly working with ADT at some point in the future, but proprietary is the word that comes to mind for me. So to Taylor's point, a lot of people start a conversation with a company. They don't necessarily have a head of innovation, somebody seeking out new technologies, and it's somebody who says, I've heard the buzz, I saw the 50 different booths at Apartmentalize, we need to go with smart home technology. And I'm using smart home because that's the space that I play in. The first customer the first company that you talk to, the first supplier of that technology can wow you with how the product works, can wow you with the potential, can wow you with the revenue that you can drive from it. And you can end up down a road with a company that uses a proprietary piece of software, uses proprietary software or hardware, and really drive confusion down the road. If the service isn't up to par, if the parts break, if the company starts to falter and you wonder how much longer is this company going to be in business, if it's a proprietary piece of equipment or if it's a technology that doesn't play well with others, that's where you get some naysayers who start to say, hey, maybe smart home's not the right thing for multifamily. Worked well in single family, works well in builder, works really well with the high-end solutions like Control4 and luxury. but multifamily maybe isn't a good fit for this. To Taylor's point, there are a lot of technologies out there. There's Z-Wave, which is a wireless protocol. There's Zigbee, which is a wireless protocol. There's Bluetooth. And when you look at, there's Wi-Fi, there's cellular communication. When you look at all these things, you can confuse yourself into buying a Betamax player with a VHS tape and an HDMI cord. And you're like, how come these things don't work when I plug them into my TV? But having somebody, Taylor's company, the way it works is fantastic to say, I'll just guide you through this. He's not pushing you towards one solution or the other. He's saying this is what's capable, what's possible out there when it comes to smart home, and it's up to you to make the decision based on the needs of your company. So that's the way I see all of this coming together, is more consultants in the space who are able to just break through the noise and say, here's what smart home can be, and based on what you need smart home to be, here's the direction that you should go. So
I'll just add to that. I think, as vendors in the space, we got to make sure we're not being short-sighted as far as, hey, we planted our flag in this property and now we have this walled garden. So, our solution, we're completely API driven. Our goal is to be as easy to interoperate across different platforms, because ultimately the software layer that a lot of these things come together. You can have multi-protocol radios in buildings and stuff like that. So the hub piece of it is one aspect, but then it's that end user application, eliminating the 42 apps like you mentioned. If you try to build that walled garden, you isolate the property from the potential value of using that technology in a more broad platform. And ultimately, I think that's when it starts to detract, because it starts to plant doubt whether, strategically or directionally, this is the right thing to introduce into a portfolio. If you have that one bad experience with your pilot site, you're never going to expand it outside of that. So, as vendors, we got to make sure we're not short-sighted, and we have to be thinking big picture about how we interoperate with each other nicely.
And I'll just add one more thing real quick. APIs are not just a simple thing. For those of you who are not techie people, and I'm not a techie person, right? I'm a sales guy. An API is not just like, hey, here's a 16-digit code and just put it into your system, now everything works great. There's priorities that come to that. There's every single one of you is asking your suppliers, can you integrate this product in? And we have our own roadmaps, we have our own order that we go through, and if somebody's saying, can you integrate it in for 10,000 units, that's a higher priority for us than can you integrate it in for this pilot that I'm doing in 100 units. So it sounds really cool, and I thought, when we acquired IOTAS, that it was going to be like APIs, just put them all in there, It's apparently it's not that simple. It is on the back end. There's ways that you can do it, but there's obviously a priority to things. Mm-hmm. So all gets noisy in there.
Well said.
Now, just to get a feel for our audience here, if I was to ask, how many of you feel confident that you could explain the difference between Z-Wave and Zigbee and what they do and Wi-Fi? Raise your hand. You could clearly articulate that difference. Okay. I didn't want to go into this too much detail if you all already knew, but I think one of the challenges when you're in multifamily is figuring out how do you pass information from, in a residential unit, I can have that one hub and I can make sure that it can connect to all the sensors in my house. But now we're talking about a multifamily unit where I want to gather some of that information back to the enterprise level. And the challenge is, how do I do that? So Zigbee and Z-Wave are both mesh technologies where they can pass the note to their neighbor and say, here's some information, broadcast this, and it broadcasts it to the next and next, and it can work its way all the way down until you have some type of device that's collecting all that data at the end. And so Z-Wave and Zigbee definitely came of age about 15 years ago to solve some of the problems of being able to continue to pass the message around, and as long as one can talk to the other, any that are in that mesh can communicate with each other. That works for certain deployments. You mentioned that you guys use a little bit different protocol. Yep. I would imagine the reason you have to do a different protocol is because your device is right up against something that's passing voltage, and you've got a lot of...
I'll give you a real quick synopsis. So we've looked at Z-Wave, we've looked at Zigbee, we've looked at quite a few protocols. We're using LoRaWAN right now for a couple of reasons. One, it's very good at going long distances through building materials. Yeah. So I punch my signal out of the electric panel, I punch it through concrete, steel, and I go about 1,000 feet, and I go up and down, 3-4 stories.
Because you're not sitting on the counter in the kitchen.
Correct.
You're inside a closed metal
Yeah, you call it
case.
a Faraday cage.
Right.
It's literally going to create interference on my device, and most protocols can't get out of that. The other piece of it is extremely low power. So that allows me to inductively charge and actually harvest enough power. I do minute-by-minute transmission starting at about 1 amp with this. So, you know, for me to be able to do that, you know, give literally 500,000 data points annually on a panel or an individual asset within a panel. You know, this could be monitoring elevators. It could be monitoring centralized HVAC. From a maintenance perspective, you want to be able to have as clear a profile and signature for those pieces of equipment as possible. So getting that real-time data, this was the only protocol that we were able to engineer around that not only, you know, lets me harvest the power I need and transmit with a really low power signal, but then also punch through all the complexities of the facilities that we're in. So I'd love to have a Z-Wave one, I think maybe in a residential setting where I'm only trying to go 30 feet to a gateway. That's a little different than, you know, a lot of the campuses that I'm operating on right now where we have one gateway, you know, for that whole campus.